good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to a post on some of my fictional work. As you might know, I like to sort of explore the creative process and read some of my work to the camera to see if it works. If it feels right when you're reading it, it probably works on the page. So here we go. This scene starts out with Mr. Randall. He is a secret agent, pimp ex-gigolo who is trapped in his apartment in the city during an epidemic. How appropriate. After a poorly muted telephone conference, or rather a Zoom conference, in which his sycophantic employees in the intelligence office could hear that he had paid his friend Roxanne, a down-on-her-luck housekeeper, to give him head throughout the 2.5-hour Skype meeting. Roxanne told him that he needed to fix his sense of pride, and he started screaming, "That shit's broken, get out, you cunt," until his neighbor punched him in the face for cursing in front of Roxanne's child. While icing his face, he felt like he was about to pass out and became terrified that the illness he'd caught might kill him in his sleep. So he called for help from a pair of young women he employed as high-end call girls. But they were afraid to get sick, so they sent their destitute friend over instead. She is an older prostitute who has tattoos and scars all over her face. So, beginning of the scene. Mr. Randall awakes on clean sheets to a woman with scars and tattoos on her face. She is draping wet washcloths across his forehead. She's a sturdy woman, and she must have moved him as he slept. "Who are you? I thought you were an angel. How long have I been out?" he croaked. "2 days. Your fever broke last night," she said in a voice that was barely above a whisper. She was very shy and soft-spoken, despite her fierce, scarred appearance. "That guy really beat the hell out of me. I must look like you now." He felt the bruised side of his face. It was still swollen and scabbed over. "You don't look nothing like me, sir," she said. She was embarrassed of the scars on her face, but still proud. He realized his mistake too late. He'd insulted her. "I'm sorry, I wasn't thinking. You must be the one Sarah told me about, the one who got cut up last year. Where are Cassie and Sarah?" "They sent me. They are staying in." He hadn't shaved in 2 days, but his face still had a nice, handsome shape. She studied it appreciatively as he drank 2 glasses of water in rapid succession. "Do you want some soup?" she asked him in a high, soft voice. "Thank you," he said, wondering if he had locked his wallet in the safe. "You're the woman Cassie told me about, right? I heard about what happened to you. I hope those guys got what they deserved." "Yes," she whispered and turned away. Her hair was nicely braided and she had lipstick and eyeliner on. She regretted how lumpy her back looked in her shirt. Cassie and Sarah were shaped perfectly. "What happened to Roxanne?" he asked. "The woman who was here when I got here?" "Yeah, her. She told me she was taking her son back to her ex-husband. Was she your girlfriend?" He laughed. "So, no," she said. "All she wanted was to party and escape from her happy suburban family," he said. "It must not have been that happy. Did she love you?" "She was my friend, but she was never going to love me. She wanted me to pay her to do dirty things." "Did you love her?" No, drugs can give an illusion of intimacy, though. I showed her pictures of the woman I love, and she said she looked stupid because her mouth was open in so many of the photos. That pissed me off. So you love the woman in the photos? I don't know what she represents, but she represents something I love. I want to watch everyone watching her and have her looking back at me. It is like a vision. It makes me crazy. His old tic came back, and he started stroking his inner thigh. It was something he did when he was excited or turned on about something. Cassie and Sarah found your wallet and have been taking advances on what you will pay for the help you've gotten over the past week. Cassie told me you needed help, twice per day. She said you needed that sort of thing. By help, she meant something a little bit more intimate. She had brought him fresh clothes and set them on the bed next to him. She got down on her knees in front of him and looked up at him through thick lashes, her scars and tattoos vivid in the lamplight. "Oh, no, I don't need that," he said. "I didn't mean," she interrupted, embarrassed, getting up off of the floor, trying to make it look like she had kneeled down to move his shoes. I wouldn't want to, after your trauma," he said. "I didn't mean me. Cassie offered it," she said, embarrassed. "I don't want to because of your face. I just..." "Oh," she said, turning away from him to fold some towels. "What I said earlier about you looking like me, that wasn't true. You are nothing like me. You aren't ugly like me," he said. She stopped folding the towels. "We both have scars," he said, "but you are not ugly. I don't want to with Cassie or Sarah. They were less interesting than a plate of ham sandwiches when I recruited them. I would rather with you than with them, but I can't. I'm married, my wife." This was a lie. I mean, he's married, but he's never been faithful. "Is your wife out of town?" she asked. "Yes, with her sister. Are you going to go to her?" "Yes, I think so," he said. He was lying. Mr. Randall wanted to go to the woman in the photos. Next scene is of the woman in the photos with another man. "Why do you keep obsessing about Mr. Randall?" Greg asked the woman in the photos. That woman was me. Feeling dejected, he had come a long way to be here, and although it was nice to get laid, nothing was going as he'd hoped. I felt bad for disappointing him. "I don't know," I said. "It doesn't make any sense why I'm so obsessed with him." "He's not right for you. I could treat you better," said Greg. "If you don't want to see me with him, you should walk away from me. I'm insane. I know it is all wrong, and I know that you are better in every way, but I'm not. I deserve the bad." "You're wrong," he sighed. "Your life doesn't have to go the way you think it does. You don't have to punish yourself for leaving an unhappy situation." "I left my family," I said. "I left my children." "But you still took care of them when things got bad. You came back when they needed you." "Why doesn't this work? With the two of us? Is it just Mr. Randall, or..." "We're too alike," he said. "I feel so comfortable with you, but I feel like you're married to someone else, as though the great love of your life has already happened to you." "In some ways that is true. You have, but I still love you. You have all of the things I want," he said. So do you, but I still feel sick about him, Mr. Randall. I don't know if it's him or something else. I don't know what to do about it. Just try something new. Try me, and maybe the feeling will fade. The feeling, it's archetypal. Maybe that's the problem. With me, with him, you are both drawn to a fantasy rather than reality. But the euphoria when dreams come true, it is what makes life worth living. We're just a couple of dreamers. And I'm too real, he said. You're too honest. Mr. Randall is a mystery. And you would rather die than to find out the secret. I like mysteries. What if the mystery is merely why you think there is more to him than the shallow fool that I see? Why would you take that chance? Foolish chances. Placing a bet that there is some little essential part of him trying to grow and become new. Men do not change at his age and after what he's done. It wasn't his fault. He decided to play the hero and the rogue. I've often thought that the military is the only way to channel people's evil energy towards something constructive for the community. There's a time for order and a time for organic reorganization, I said, trying to be logical. To everything turn, 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 said Greg. I wanted to change the subject. I heard a song today. It was called The Lady of the Rose. It was an allegory of a woman who can't hear because she is saturated with sadness over lost things. If you are closed off from sadness, do you really hear and see more? Is that why you want Mr. Randall? You think he sees things that you can't? Maybe. I liked the ending, where she wondered if she would ever love anything so much that she would be so overwhelmed and blinded as the Lady of the Rose. I recently had a dream in which I carried so many memories that I could hardly see anything new. I was wandering around at night in a foreign city, and I had lost my shoes and coat. It kept getting darker, and there were no street lights. I was searching for help in a government office, and I didn't know why. When I found it, I think they erased my memory. That sounds like a horrible dream. I'm not sure. It might have been a wonderful moment rather than a sad one. The removal of blindness. I wonder if the virus will do that to some people. When we get sick, it often hurts our brain and removes layers of memories. Maybe it will cure people's depression. If they can't remember something that makes them sad, they can't be sad about it. I agreed. It may help the blind see something beautiful and wonderful. I wish it would help me see why I want Mr. Randall so much. Love is blind, said Greg. No, I said. I know exactly how it will happen. He is just a collector. He's like a person who buys plants and fails to water them. He's a person with a basement full of dead plants. You are completely ridiculous. You want him to kill you? I'm sadder than I let myself know sometimes, I said. Greg was always trying to cheer me up. He was like a nice bear, so soft, comforting, and uncomplicated, the opposite in every way from Mr. Randall. That night, I dreamed I had been trapped in an apartment inside of Mr. Randall's eyeball for over a year. It had been a year since I'd last seen him, and We hadn't spoken, but during that brief meeting, a fragment of myself had broken off and been sucked into his iris. It was as though a vortex pulled me in through the window to his soul, a place that looked to me much like a rather drab apartment that existed within his eye. I had been balled up in a corner of the apartment inside of his eyeball, usually under an end table next to the sofa, in the fetal position, and I felt so ignored and small, like he didn't really want me to be there, or he wasn't sure what to do about me, so he just pretended that I wasn't there. He never acknowledged me and never invited me out, but then again he rarely visited the apartment. He was a man who had a soul, but who rarely consulted it. Or perhaps he spent most of his time in a more manly division of his soul that concerned itself with more worldly affairs. I, in this dream, had accidentally trapped myself within the feminine division of his soul, and it was a rather drab apartment in his eyeball. When I first moved in to this apartment, there was a woman living in the bedroom, and she would leave the apartment quite often. I assumed that she went out to meet him sometimes in the real world. Whenever she got a phone call, I assumed it was him, but I never felt brave enough to speak with her. She didn't seem to be aware of my existence, or at least she didn't think I was important enough to acknowledge. Maybe his eyeball or his apartment was filled with lots of people like me, hiding in all of the little corners, afraid to come out. One day, she left and didn't come back. I assumed that their relationship had ended for some reason, and she was no longer welcome in his eyeball apartment soul. Maybe she'd insulted him and he was very sensitive. Then, after her, 2 youngish, nondescript women with smartphones moved into this apartment. I thought they were prostitutes, and they didn't seem to care about him much, as they rolled their eyes whenever he called them to go out and meet him in the real world. I wanted him to call me on my phone and acknowledge that I existed, but I didn't own a phone. I felt like I was being ignored, in the hope that I would simply leave. I felt that if he acknowledged me, I could stand up and get out of my hiding place and become a real person who walked around and ate and slept in a bed and spoke. I didn't like being a sad ghost, stuck in his eye. I felt like I needed his permission to do all of those things. I was in his eyeball, after all. One day, I felt brave enough to come out of my corner, and I asked the 2 women if they would give me his telephone number. I must have looked a fright, because they said no. I certainly felt small, disheveled, crazy, and untrustworthy. I had no idea how I looked. And what would I do if I had a phone and his telephone number? What would I say? Hi, you may not remember me, but I took up residence in your soul about a year ago. It seems that you haven't forgotten me, or you are unable to forget me for some reason. But I'm still here, and I feel like we should meet because I feel like I'm here for a reason, even though I'm not entirely sure what that reason is. I thought I knew what his reply would be. He would ignore me or say, "I can't help you." That may have been a true reply, but I still felt like there was a puzzle I needed to solve in order to get out of his apartment, or to rescue this fraction of my soul that I'd given away. This need drove me out of my corner and led me to the room of the woman who had been in this apartment since the beginning of time, or at least for far longer than any of the women I'd seen come and go. She, a gorgeous 7-foot-tall black transvestite, had a large, decadent room at the end of a long hallway, and she came and went through the living room and front door without concern for anyone. I determined that she was not a person in real life, but rather a person he had invented, who embodied all of the things he admired: masculine strength and logical analysis, feminine beauty and wisdom. She was his vanity. She was his goddess, who ruled over his soul, and no one could ever compare to her. I wondered if I could get her approval, then I would be able to get his, so I timidly knocked on her door. "Ma'am, I was wondering if you could give me Mr. Randall's phone number so that if anything happened to the apartment while you were out, I would be able to call him and tell him, you know, as a sort of emergency backup." She replied, "You want to be his emergency backup? Honey, he already has plenty of those. So you won't give me his phone number?" I said. "No, sweetie," and she shushed me away. When he entered the apartment the next time, I was determined to ask him for his number. I was tired of waiting and hiding like a ghost, hoping that my haunting would draw his attention and change how he felt about me in the real world. I still hadn't considered simply walking out the front door and never coming back, and I don't know why. I didn't even know where the door would take me. Oblivion? Back to the real world where he and I had no connection? I felt like I had to stay in this place until I had learned something or made some sort of connection. But when he walked past me to consult with the goddess, I didn't budge from my hiding spot under the end table by the sofa. I was so small, I must have been almost invisible. All this while, the two young women were sitting on the sofa and playing with their phones, ignoring him. I understood that was what caused him to remember a person, when they ignored him. I suppose that I was the same. That was why I was here, stuck in his apartment, after all. In his eyeball, of course. In this dream, he had looked at me and we had chosen to ignore one another the last time we'd met. So here I was, 1 year later, still hiding in a corner of his soul and being ignored, still feeling small and hating that feeling, but not wanting to let it go either, wanting and waiting for him to justify that feeling with the all-important male gaze. I was growing impatient and frustrated. My courage was beginning to assert itself and demand that I leave this space at once. So I walked over to the front door. I'd been here for a year, after all. I had no idea what it would show me. And there it was, one of his memories. He was walking through a whorehouse in an old industrial tower building in Frankfurt. The floor was concrete, and the girls were in rooms they decorated with sad little throw rugs and Christmas lights. They looked like a teenager's idea of what sexy looked like. He walked through the hallways of one floor, peeking in at bored women laying around in their underwear on beds covered with cheap cotton sheets in bright colors that would be more appropriate in a child's bedroom. A neon arrow showed him a stairwell where he passed a couple of men who were coming down as he was going up. They had come from the trans woman floor, and while he wasn't interested in purchasing their services, he wanted to take a look. They were much more trim, leggy, and exotic than the women on the floor below. He could see the appeal, but he was in the market for a vagina today, so he went back down the stairs and chose a South American beauty who presented her ass to him like a bored cat. It was exactly what he had come for. I backed away from the door and closed it, feeling rather confused. My first impulse was to return to my hiding place, but the feeling of being out in the open was pleasant. To my surprise, I was the size and shape of a full-grown woman. How on earth had I managed to make myself so small for so long? Just then he returned from his consultation with the goddess and went into the bathroom to draw himself a bath. That was something I'd never seen him do before. He usually only ever came to the apartment to consult with the goddess. The other women who stayed in the apartment seemed to be nothing more than call girls he'd gotten used to, cardboard cutouts of people who were only passing through. As I listened to the water running in the bathroom, I walked around the apartment and looked at his things, thinking about the insignificance of our lives. My curiosity drew me to the bathroom, where I quietly opened the door and climbed into the bathtub, opposite him. I kept my knees tucked up so as not to intrude on his space too much. All I had really wanted to do was to look at him in the eyes and figure out who he was. That was why I was here, after all, trapped in this apartment within his eye. When I'd first met him in real life, he'd been waiting for me in a room in an old building with tall ceilings. It was a timeless space where perhaps we had met 1,000 years before. He knew I was going to walk past him, and he was waiting. I didn't know he was there. He wanted to know if I would recognize him, and I did, but I couldn't allow myself to see him. So instead, a part of me broke away and got pulled into his eye, like a little spirit sucked into the blackness of his iris. It was a part of me I could still see in some of my dreams. Now we were finally together, face to face, in a bathtub, in an apartment, in his eyeball. I felt like we were children, twins even, sharing a bath. He just looked at me with a quizzical, blank expression, and I was very happy to finally be so close. I asked him if I could sleep next to him. I didn't really have anything to say to him. I just wanted to be close to him. He shrugged his shoulders in consent, and I was very happy, and I felt like I was complete and had fulfilled my mission. I was nothing, he was nothing. Together in this imaginary bathtub, in this apartment, in his eye, in this dream, we were nothing together. At least this was how I felt until I learned about the young woman he had raped. It was all there in the file, and I didn't doubt it. It said he had tied her to a radiator and raped her in the mouth. In his appointments with his therapist, he had concluded that he had a hard time viewing women who had tattoos as fully conscious or fully in control of their will. He viewed them as extensions of himself or as human sacrifices who advertised their enjoyment of pain and abuse through the markings on their bodies. His therapist had instructed him to write a story in which he had an angry, tattooed daughter who had been abandoned by her father through a mistake that wasn't her father's fault, and who was searching for closeness to a father figure when a crazy man attacked her and hurt her. The gravity of what he, Mr. Randall, had done did seem to sink in after he completed this fictional exercise. But he was a man of extremes, and began to wonder if the solution to his shame was to become Brahmacharya and give up sex altogether. He even thought about having his penis removed entirely and dressing as a woman in penance. His therapist told him that the shame of his memories of unspeakable pleasures would haunt him regardless of what he did, unless he did something to atone. I began to understand that by helping me hide from the Inquisition, he was trying to atone. I was trying to atone for something too, for a life spent following the rules. I wanted to be a little bit evil, but I thought that if I confined these impulses to imaginary and academic arenas, I would be safe from any consequences. My, how wrong I was. Thank you for watching this fictional exercise, and I will post more of these.